Hi everyone, it's Friday night and it's Friday Night Photoshop. I'm Mike Leonard. Tonight I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite filters that I use in Photoshop. I've just opened an image and what I'm going to do is go up to the filters pull down and we'll just walk through some of these. First of all, we've got these neural filters, which is pretty impressive. We've talked about these before, but let me just click on this and I'll just like to show you a couple of things that we can do here. If any of these for you have like a little cloud in them, that means that they haven't been downloaded yet. And what you need to do is to go and click on the cloud, and it will download and install that filter into your computer. And there's no charge for this. So what some of these do, there's one here for skin smoothing, and it shows you a before and after. Here's smart portrait, makeup. This is pretty impressive. That's where you open up one image with somebody who's got makeup on, then you open up another image, and it will actually take the makeup from one image and transpose it to the other one. I've not done it, but I've seen it done. It's interesting. I just don't have that need. This one is really impressive, and I am going to bring this one up. This is a creative filter. You notice it says beta. Well, it's because they're still working on this, and it might be very possible that someday you'll open this up to use this again and there'll be a new cloud there. And it's a cloud simply because they've got an update. In this case, I just am going to arbitrarily pick this winter scene and just take a look at what it does. This just made it look like snow fell on New York. And look at all the snow along the coast here. And of course, it looks kind of blue because it's cold. I could choose another one of these presets, and let's just see what this does. Let's just try this one more, this snowy one. Okay, and that looks a lot like that first one, doesn't it? But I actually see a little more snow up here on the buildings. So it's pretty impressive that you can change the season in a photo these days. To shut this off, we can either cancel or we just throw that little switch and it shuts it off. There's a style transfer that could be useful if you have a number of different images and you'd like to make them all look the same. I don't use that too often, just like this harmonization. That could be really useful if you were to cut out a subject that you may have taken indoors and you wanted to put that person in an outdoor scene. Well, if you lit it with a fluorescent light on the inside and you got daylight outside, this would transpose the lighting to make it look like it's a little more realistic. Here's one color transfer. Honestly, I've not done much with that. This colorize I have used, and this is pretty impressive. I did a whole night about tipping color images to black and white, and then black and white back to color. And this is the filter that I use for that. This does very well to take black and white images and to assign colors to the way that it should be, or it thinks it should be. And it does a pretty good job, I gotta say. Super Zoom is very much like the zoom that you get over in Adobe Camera Raw. This is where you can quadruple the size of an image, and it's really useful if you're dealing with small images. If you've got pictures that may have come out of a digital camera that you shot 10, 15 years ago, back when you thought that 3 megapixels was a real big deal, this is a great option to be able to go and upsize something, and that can be very useful. Again, I use it over in Adobe Camera Raw. This depth blur can make the foreground or the background be sharp. It affects the bokeh. This probably isn't the best image to do that on. JPEG Artifacts is a good one if you're dealing with a low resolution JPEG image and say one that you might download from Instagram or from Facebook, and you need to be able to wash it up because maybe you have to make a print of that because the person did not send you the file like they should have. So this can help with that. There are other tools you can use for noise reduction, but this is a pretty good one. And the last one here is photo restoration. This too is a beta, and they're looking for input on this. I just recently read. If you have an image that's in bad shape, try using this one and see what it does. And you can give them feedback. They read all the feedback, and oftentimes it's from the feedback that we can present to them to Adobe, that will be something that will be added in the next update. So there's a quick look through the neural filters. Okay, I'm going to go back up to filter and we'll take a look at some other ones along the way here. Now there is this filter gallery, and this brings out a whole bunch of filters: artistic, brushstrokes, distort, sketch, stylize, texture. We can look at all of these. If I bring out artistic and if I click on this colored pencil, you can see what it's doing. If I do this one, I don't even know what they call that, cutout. Here's dry brush. Here's film grain. These are built right into Photoshop. You don't have to pay anything extra. All you have to do is click on it. And in a lot of these, you do have some adjustments. So you can make something look maybe a little better. Now here's poster edges. Here I can change the thickness. Let's just bring this up and see what it does. Yeah, that's interesting. And if I bring it back down, you get a little more detail. Here's to what degree of posterization do you want? That's just removing bits, really. And almost looks kind of cartoonish, doesn't it? Edge intensity or less. So all of these have these adjustments that you can go and work with. Let's invert that. Yeah, interesting. Kind of looks like a canvas, doesn't it? Smudge stick, sponge. Hey, look at that. Underpainting. Here's watercolor. And again, you can vary the brush detail here. And what do we have for pull downs? Oh, look at this. There's watercolor. Here's water paper. But suffice it to say, there's almost an endless number of filters that you can go and apply. The one thing I will say that's worth noting here is if you find an effect that you really like, let's say, well, I don't know if I like that one. Maybe if I bring the stroke size down, maybe I'd like it a little bit better. But if you find one that you really like, you might want to do it again. And so it's worth noting, where are you and what filter are you using? And this is something that you might have to make a note of and write these things down, because they're not necessarily going to come right back to you. Let's just look at some of these others that are out here. Here's some brush strokes, angled strokes, ink outlines. I'm just really jumping through these. But you can see there's a lot of things you can do with this. Under distort, here's diffuse glow, ocean ripple. I think you're getting the idea though, right? This is something that you can go in and experiment with. That's kind of cool. That would look good on a letterhead, wouldn't it? Or how about like on a business card, if you had a business in New York City? So there's a lot of different ones here. Let's just go look at stylize. There's only one under stylize. I don't know why they never wrote more for it. And then under texture, we've got some interesting ones. Here is intentional grain, mosaic tiles, and I think we can change the tile size. Yeah, we can. We make the tiles bigger or smaller, which is kind of fun. Patchwork. It kind of looks like something you'd see in a quilt or on fabric, right? Stained glass. That's kind of cool looking. And then texturizer. This looks like it's printed on canvas. So if you were to print this and if you could cleverly wrap it around, you could probably fake people into thinking it might be canvas, depending upon how you light it. And it says invert. I'm not sure what that'll do. Oh, I see. It just changed the angle of the light. So that could be significant. So I'm going to cancel out of this and go back up here to filter. Now, one thing that's important to note is if you find that these might be grayed out, you want to go over here to image and go to mode and make sure that you are in RGB color and make sure that you're in 8 bits per channel. If you're in 16 or 32, a lot of these filters won't work. So you're going to want to just make sure that you do that first. That could be a concern if you're opening up from Adobe Camera Raw and maybe you've got that set to bring it over here as a 16-bit image. There's nothing wrong with the 16-bit image, but just a lot of these filters won't work with 16-bit. They'll only work with 8. So that might be a reason why, if you ever look at this and if it looks grayed out, that could be the reason. So those are just some of the things that you see under Filter Gallery. Adaptive wide angle, I don't use that much. Camera raw filter, that's one that we can get to either here or by using Control Shift A, and that jumps you right over to camera raw. There's lens correction, which again is something I prefer to do in camera raw. Liquify is kind of a fun one. Let's bring this up. This is one where if you have a face in the picture, you can do some interesting things with that. But in this sort of an image, let's just see what we can do. If I come up here and choose the pucker tool, if I click and hold on this, look at what it does. It's making things smaller. And if I click and hold and bring this down, I can resize things to have them smaller. And if I bring the brush up bigger, well, this is where I could take the whole top of this building and make it smaller. This could be a fun little thing to do at some point. There we go. So I was just clicking and moving the mouse. That's all I did. So, and if I do the opposite, if I use the bloat tool, watch what this does. Let me bring this down, and I can take this building and make it bigger. Now this could be useful if you wanted to make this cloud a little bigger. Or maybe you'd like to, we could make that building over here just a little bit bigger. We can do a lot of fun stuff. And so again, this is one of those tools that's absolutely worth going and experimenting with and see what you make of it. Now, if there was a person in here, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, those would all be in effect. So I've just loaded this image, and I'm going to go back to filter, and I'm going to go down here to liquify. And now this should find some facial features, which now it does. In fact, here's face number 1. Well, there's only one face in here. If you had more than one person, you'd see face 1, face 2, face 3. I don't know what the upper limit is. The one thing I will tell you is you might have to look for the faces because it doesn't exactly go left to right. I don't quite understand how it counts them, but it does. So let's say I'd like to adjust the eye size. If I link this, what I do to one eye will affect the other. So watch the eyes. It's like she's thinking about something. Or you can make the eyes really big. So in this case, I'm just going to leave them alone. Eye height, eye width. You see, you can affect the eyes. One thing that I find is great is nose width. See, to make the nose just a little less. That could be nice. The smile. I can make her smile more or not as much. Here's forehead, where you can move the hairline up or down. The jawline. Face width. A lot of women like to have this brought down. If you just bring this in just a little bit and don't tell them you did it, and then when they look at the image, there's something about it they really like. They don't know. So the idea is you don't tell them. That's just some of the things that you can do in here. And my recommendation is go and experiment with these. Like in this case, it looks like her eye over here could be open just a little bit more. So if I were to take and unclick this, and maybe if I just open that eye just a little bit more, not much, just a little, that seems to balance it. And if I take her other eye and close it just a little, you see, I've just kind of balanced that, didn't I? Now I should be able to hit this preview on and off, and you can see here's the before, there's the after. Before, after. It's all something that's entirely up to you. Okay, I'm going to come back to this New York City scene and go back up into filters. And I don't do a whole lot with vanishing point. 3D, I don't do anything with. Blur, I do. Now, there's some cool things that we can do in blur. One of, I think, the more popular ones is Gaussian blur. Now, let's see where we could apply that here, shall we? in this case, I'm going to bring out layers and I'm going to jump this Control J. It makes an exact copy of this. Now this image is pretty sharp as is. Now I'm going to come to filter. I'm going to go to blur. I'm going to go to Gaussian blur. Wow, that's quite the blur. But I'm going to bring this down, and I do want to make this soft. Maybe soft like that. There we go. I'm going to say OK to that. Now watch what I can do. Here is the layer that's all blurry. Here's the layer that's pretty sharp. If I were to mix these, or blend these is the proper word, with opacity, I can bring this down, and can you see what's happening? It's leaving behind like a little glow. Let me just go in a little bit tighter so you can see this. Doesn't this look a little bit dreamy? This is what I call that Hallmark card effect, where you want to make something look just a little bit dreamy. And here you're dreaming of going to New York. So all we're doing is we're just taking this blurry layer and the sharp layer, and we're just mixing them. And I'm almost at 50%. That's 53. Again, I use scrubbies. I just go up here and I just click and I just move this one way or the other until I get it to how I might want it. Maybe I'd like something really soft like that. You see, it's soft, but it's still sharp because you see, you can still see every window and you can see all the details. But collectively, it's pretty sharp, pretty soft though, isn't it? And it is sharp. It's kind of an oxymoron. It's soft and sharp. But that's kind of a cool effect that you can do right there with Gaussian blur. Okay, for this next filter under blur, what I'd like to show you is this motion blur. Now, this looks like it's a mistake, right? It looks like you were shooting with a slow shutter speed and you got that motion blur, right? Well, the cool thing here is we can say, did you move your camera side to side or did you move it up and down? If we go enough with this, we can get this kind of an interesting effect that some people say are creative strokes, meaning some people will shoot with their camera with a slow shutter speed intentionally, and they will move the camera from top to bottom to make trees and buildings and other things have this interesting abstract look. And to me, I like doing it this way because I have a whole lot more control over it, number one. I mean, look at that. I mean, that's quite a bit. And I can also choose in which direction do I want that to be. I can change this right in here. So maybe this could be the effect that you get, when the windshield wiper goes on a piece of glass that's got some oil on it. So, but this motion blur can be kind of fun. And that's one that you might want to go and experiment with.
It's called intentional camera movement.
Intentional camera movement. There you go. Okay. There's blur gallery that I don't use a lot. There is the spin blur. I will just show you what it does. It's kind of an interesting one. If I make this a little bigger, I think you can see what it's doing. It basically does the motion blur, but it does it as though it's in a circle. Now, another filter that I do use a lot under noise, we've got despeckle, and then we have dust and scratches. I use dust and scratches quite a bit. There's so many times when I'm opening up an older image that's got a lot of scratches or a lot of dust spots. This is where you can go into dust and scratches. And if I were to zoom in, you can see what it does. It will take the nearest pixel and will duplicate it. And if I bring this up really high, you can see what it's doing. It's actually adding noise. But if I bring this down, if I bring this threshold up, you can see what it's doing here. It's trying to get rid of, you see the grain that's up here? Well, if I bring this down and if I bring this up, I can get that sky to be nice and solid without any of that grain, but at the peril of losing a heck of a lot of detail. So this is one to be used sparingly. This threshold is like a mask. So as I move this over and over, you can say, okay, what part of the image do I want to have this filter applied to? And this may not be the best example in this particular image, but this does pretty well to get rid of a lot of noise that can be in an older image if you're ever doing any restoration of images. I do use that noise filter quite a bit. Pixelate I almost never use, but again, this is something you can go and experiment with. How big do you want the pixels to be? This is what happens when you try and reproduce your image but using Legos. Render. Oh, this is kind of interesting. If you want to put a tree in the scene, we can render a tree. And watch what this does. Yeah, that's a nice tree. So we'll go with that. And we now have a tree growing out of the ocean. This would be something you'd want to put on a layer because now I can't move this. I'm stuck with a tree and out in the, is this the Hudson? Control Z that one. But there are some things that you can render, which is kind of interesting. Sharpen is a good one, and unsharp mask is the one that I use more than anything else. What this does is a very nice job of sharpening an image. And here we get to choose the radius size. So if I bring this down to like 0.1, this is just going to be sharpening the fine details in the image. And if I bring this up just a little bit, well, you'll see that the image gets really sharp really fast. So you might have to bring the amount down. Let me zoom in just a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. And again, I can take the preview off and turn it back on. Sharpening technically adds noise to the scene. And what it does is, if I bring this way up, you can see this exaggerated. See how now I've got like a white line on the side of this building and going all around it, in fact. And on the bright areas, we got a little bit of darkness. All it does is to define the edges, to make it look like it's sharper. Now, if I bring this radius all the way down, you'll notice all that noise goes away. So you have to be careful how you do the sharpening and how much of the effect that you use. And a lot of these numbers that you work with will directly relate to the size of the image. If you're trying to edit a postcard, for instance, you're going to be going with much lower numbers than if you're working with 24 by 36 size poster. That's when you might be needing to move these numbers up quite a bit. The threshold, again, is like a masking. If I bring this up, you'll notice the higher I go, I think the less effect you'll see. And if I bring this all the way down to 0, you'll see the greatest effect. This is really useful if ever you have to sharpen an image. Sometimes this can be very useful if you're ever doing any sort of forensic work. Maybe you take a picture of a license plate and it's a little blurry, but the police need to be able to see the number. You can bring it up into this unsharp mask and you can do some rather amazing things to pull details out. Now, there are other sharpening algorithms out there, and there's some that you can even buy. And there's some pretty good sharpening algorithms just in Adobe Camera Raw. But tonight I'm just talking about the filters that are in Photoshop. Stylize. Let's just see what this does. I'm going to try this oil paint under Stylize. Let's see what this does. Oh, look at that. So this is giving me a sample, and I can zoom in on this if I want, or I should be able to even zoom out to see more. So this is making it, they claim, look like an oil painting. Personally, I think there are better ways to do this, but let's just try this and see what it does. I guess arguably it's a better oil painting than I could ever do. But there is, again, it's built right into Photoshop. I'm going to do a Control Z. Let's go back up to filter. I wish I didn't have to keep going in and out all the time. But we could try tiles. Let's see what that does. Number of tiles, 10. And I guess I'll use the background color. And let's just say, okay, what does that do? Oh, there we go. So this is just broken it out into a bunch of tiles. And I guess if you wanted that effect, there are some things in Photoshop that it's capable of, but I just would never use that. Maybe you have a use for it, and that'd be great to hear. All right, I guess to get down here, here's video. You know, video, or NTSC as they used to call it, was interlaced. If you think about taking your hands and putting them together such that the fingers kind of make like a basket weave, right? Well, that's kind of what interlace is all about. If you're to take your fingers and put one hand above the other such that all your fingers are in a row from top to bottom, well, that's more like progressive. Now, when you take a picture from video that was done in that interweave or interlace, you might get what looks like a sawtooth pattern around some verticals or circles and things like that. And this is where you can de-interlace. I'm sorry I don't have a sample to show you, but this can make the image look a little bit better. And then we've got this NTSC colors. Back in the day, if you were a broadcaster, the FCC had pretty tight reins on what you could broadcast. Not too different than what the state police dictates when you go down the turnpike. They want you to go no more than, 70 miles an hour? But on the other hand, you can't go below 45. They can fine you for going too slow or for going too fast. Well, a broadcaster was under the same scrutiny, but with the Federal Communications Commission, where you couldn't go above a certain white level or below a certain black level, because that meant that the transmission was either overpowered or underpowered, and it could create all sorts of distortions and all sorts of problems for neighboring broadcasters and all that. So what this simply is a leftover from years ago, where it would make this image now be in compliance for television use. So you wouldn't have any issues. Now, most broadcasters all had an active filter or like a time-based corrector that adjusted for all this to make sure that all the levels were in perfect spec. But this ensured that it would be right before it had to do anything. And so that's where this all came from. And this video, de-interlaced in the NTSC colors, have been in here since like the very first Photoshop. This goes back many years. There are certain things in Photoshop they're really legacy items, but it's nice that they keep them in there. At some point, I could see where this could be dropped, because now with digital TV, we don't have to worry about being over or under because it's not analog, and you can't have more white than the red, the green, and the blue equaling 255, 255, and 255, which gives you white. There is no 256 or 257. That digital number doesn't exist. So that's where digital has made things a lot easier, and that's why pictures look better. All right, so I got off on video there, but now you know, right? Got it? Forget it. You don't need to know it. Under Other, I use the offset, and this is particularly useful for when we are doing the polar coordinates, which I kind of skipped over, didn't I? It's under Distort, and this is where the polar coordinates is located. But back to Other, the nice thing about this is if I use this offset, and if I move this appropriately, and I have this set to wrap around, let me just see if I can move this out just a little bit. This is a little touchy, I will say. So what we've just done is we've just slid this image over so that you can see here is what was the left-hand side of the image, and this over here is where the right-hand side of the image was. Now you can see the water doesn't quite match, the sky doesn't match, the clouds are certainly not right. So if I were to make this into a polar coordinates, I'd want to clean all this up, because we know that the now right side and the now left side will come together perfectly. There's not going to be any gaps there. We know that's going to be perfect. Now, if I do the same thing with vertical, look at this. If I move this over, see what's happening? So I've just basically shifted this. So now we're looking at the four corners of this image, but they're all right together. So this could be useful for, again, if you're doing polar coordinates. Usually it's on the vertical side that you'd want to be getting that to be proper. And I think that pretty much wraps up all the filters that I use on a regular basis that's in this particular filters catalog. So I'm going to explore some plugins that you can buy, and specifically ON1. What I'm going to do first is do a quick Control J to make a copy of this normal background layer. Now go up to Filter, and I'm going to go to this ON1, and I'm choosing the effects. This can take a little bit of time to load, but here we go. There are a number of different filters and presets that exist that you can go in and experiment with. And some of these will be nicer than others, depending upon the scene. So in this case, I'm going to come into this dynamic contrast, and I'm going to choose Surreal. Now that looks like it's really overly processed, but that's okay. I'm going to hit Done, and this will open this up into Photoshop onto its own layer. Now, if you look at this, I can turn this little eyeball on and off and say there's a before, and there's an after. If you think that's too much, all I have to do is take the opacity and just dial this back. In fact, there's no effect. If I just bring this up a little bit, maybe right about there. Okay, that's only 19%. And watch what happens if I turn this on and off. Let's zoom in on this just a little bit. Here it's off, and here it's on. See, nothing says that you have to have this at 100%. And this is why I like to do some of this blending over here in Photoshop, because I get the control to be able to get this just the way that I want it. Let's go look at some more effects that we can do with ON1, shall we? Here I've done some presets with the same scene, stepping through some of the different filters that are out there that you can experiment with. This one makes it look like an old photo, doesn't it? When you look at the torn edges in that. And we're right back to where we started. So those are some of the things that you can do when you're working with some of these filters. And my best advice is go in and experiment with all of them. Here's again ON1. We're going to the Effects 2023. And if I come back and look at all of the filters, here are the presets. You can see there's so many different ones. Cinema, color grading, culinary, instant film. I think this will probably put edges around things. Yeah, there we go. And some of these may be, not of your interest. This is one that, again, looks like it's done with old film. Some of these take a little longer to render than others. And we do have some ability in here to change to what degree. Here's this fade. You can see I can fade this back to the original, or I can bring this up. I can have like a washed out look. So I can do that right in the filter. We could colorize this. I don't know if that does anything for me, but there's a lot of things that you can do. This is almost another endless list of things that you can do in Photoshop. And if I say done to this, now because I did this on its own layer, the beauty of this is, again, I can blend this back if I want. And if I take this and take the opacity and bring this down, you see I can add whatever amount of color I might want to put into this. Now, by the way, nothing says that you can't do more to this layer. What if I were to do a Control L? Now look at what I can do after having done this adjustment. I can actually come in here and make that even grungier, if you will. I can bring the whites down just a little. I can even bring the blacks up. So you see, I could take an image that goes looking like that down to something like that, just using the Photoshop filters that we have access to, that we've worked with in the past. And all I would then have to do is take this image and save it as whatever file format I might want. Just because there's a filter applied, it doesn't matter. We can save it as a TIFF, a Photoshop file, a JPEG, and you could go and have this printed at a Walmart or Walgreens just like you would any photo. Just because there's a filter attached, they don't care. To them, it's just another JPEG. So this image has got a fair amount of noise in it, and I'm going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and I'm going to go to Denoise AI. This takes a moment to load. And what this is going to do is give you a split screen that you get to see a before and after, which is pretty nice. Now, the last time I used this, I was using the severe noise mode. You've got different modes here. And this can allegedly process a raw file for you. I can't say I've had a whole lot of success with that. But just under the severe noise, take a look at what we've just done. If I wipe this way and look at the sky versus if I go this way. Let's zoom in. Now, whenever you zoom in, it has to re-render. That's the one downside. But it does it fairly quickly. So here you're looking at the before and look at the after. Now that's not too bad. It did take out a fair amount of noise. But let's try a different model. First of all, if I click on this little tab, this is going to make a recommendation for me, and this is telling me I should have been using the standard one. Again, these controls are sticky in that it will remember what you'd used before. So now if I look at this, yeah, that's doing a nice job. But let's go see what clear does for me. If I choose clear, I think that's even nicer. Because now if you look at this, that sky looks a little bit grungy, but now it's a whole lot clearer. But also look at the buildings. This is rather amazing. One thing that they don't trumpet enough is under denoise, it does sharpening too. You see the before and the after? So maybe I don't need to recover as much original detail. Maybe I'll move this down a little bit. There we go. And if I look at the before and after again, see that's pretty noisy. That's pretty clean. So all I have to do here is say apply, and this is going to apply that noise reduction just like that. Now if I zoom in, the sky looks a whole lot cleaner. So that can be a really nice plugin. And you might want to also put that on its own layer, such that, let's say if it blurred out too much of some of the buildings, well, that's where you might want to go and make a mask and bring back some of the detail in here. But in this case, this looks pretty good, I think. I mean, the sky looks pretty nice, and there's enough detail in these buildings for satisfy my needs. So again, that filter I just used was this Topaz Labs Denoise AI. Now there is a sharpen one, and that does pretty much the same thing, but it looks for motion blur or Gaussian blur or lens blurs, and it will do its best to try and sharpen. My best advice is if you have an image that's blurry, experiment with that if you wanted to go and get this plugin and see what it does. And again, the reason I like to do it in Photoshop is for the fact that I can create my own layer and then blend it back. I'm not confined to just having that single layer and bringing the image into the program directly, which you can do. But if you don't like the effect, well, then you got to go do it again. In Photoshop, the beauty of this is at least I can blend it back and go back toward the original. And I just prefer the control. So there is a look at some of the Photoshop filters and some of the more popular plugin filters that I use in Photoshop. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in another Friday Night Photoshop.